the city of Detroit took great issue with the results of the 2020 census, and now the city has filed a lawsuit over the Bureau's 2021 population numbers as well. So joining me to talk about it all is Kurt Messer. He is the founder and director emeritus of Data Driven Detroit. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Rhonda. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's start with why the census count is so critical. What's at stake for Detroit?
Well, the census, obviously, political representation is the key point of the census. Conduct the census to understand what the population is and distribute the representatives, the congressional representatives, based on population. So we've seen with Michigan losing population and gaining very slowly. We've seen Michigan lose a congressional seat every decade since 1970. Obviously, that translates down to Detroit because Detroit has been losing population as well and losing representation because of that within the state house and state senate. The other big thing is obviously there's the importance of federal funds. Money, there's a great deal of money. There's a lot of question how many, trying to put a dollar amount on that. But the money that flows into Detroit for children's funding, for poverty funding, for schools, school lunch programs, for community development block grants, all those funding streams have a population component as part of that. So if your population drops, obviously your funding is going to drop as well. And then finally, there's kind of credit, it's perception of the city of Detroit. If it's the population is growing in any other city, you think it's a vital, active city, businesses want to come, people are thinking about moving in. If you see this continuous drop in population, obviously people are going to have second thoughts when they look to open a business, move a business, or migrate from another area of the country.
So the census is counting as though we have lost population, but Mayor Duggan is very vocal about a significant undercount from the 2020 census, but also the population estimate for 2021 as well, saying thousands of residents were not counted, as much as 20,000, particularly African American and Hispanic residents. So let's get into this a little bit more in terms of how Mayor Duggan's coming up with his numbers and how the U.S. Census is coming up with something dramatically different.
Well, if we start with the census, just to talk about why the city is challenging, or as certainly has come up with this idea that we've lost, that there was an undercount of population. The Census Bureau, after the census, does what they call the post-enumeration survey to understand how well the census was conducted. As we know, the census was April 1, 2020. Things started shutting down about the week before that because of COVID. So all the planning, Detroit had this tremendous outreach plan to touch almost every person in the city to make sure that they were involved in and answered the census. That was all stopped, obviously, when the pandemic. So a lot of the outreach was eliminated. The fact that you had the president pushing prior to the census to check on non-citizens. You had the timing, everything was pushed back. The Census Bureau does this, the census, and then does a follow-up. And that was pushed back several months. You had basically the Census Bureau going to the Supreme Court to extend the time that they collected data. The Supreme Court gave them a little time, less than they wanted, and then the president stopped it 2 weeks before the actual deadline, the new revised deadline was given.
So there were a lot of things that were kind of working against getting this data and getting the right population count. So is the U.S. Census Bureau sharing any of the formula that they use, since these extensions that they wanted, they weren't getting?
No, therein lie problems. So the Census Bureau does not allow a challenge right now to the census, the 2020 census. They are allowing cities to challenge on what they call group quarters, which are, congregate living facilities, could be dormitories, prisons, senior living centers, et cetera. So there is that challenge. But then we came up with the 2021 estimate, which according to some of the data that we've seen, and the Census Bureau and the city has asked for the Census Bureau to provide the formulas, because here comes the 2021 estimate. After a very low census number, we get a continuous loss of another 7,000 people, which makes no sense based on what we've looked at and the city has looked at on the Postal Service gives them on the number of deliveries, number of residential deliveries they make, the water, DSD.
The utility bills and
forget the letters.
Right. You guys are going to say DTE, the utility bills and water and sewage and the postal data.
Right.
So they've received all this data, not to mention the new construction Mayor Duggan talked about as well, with multiple new apartment buildings and a lot of new residents coming in. Right. So having a decline in numbers didn't seem to make sense. So now we have this lawsuit that the city has filed against the U.S. Census Bureau. So it's more than just a challenge that they're refusing to look into. Now it's a lawsuit. So will this force them to have to answer some questions about their estimates?
Well, I certainly hope so. I don't know. As you said, the Census Bureau had originally talked about allowing cities to challenge the 2021 estimate. And then this year they came out with a statement saying we're not going to do the estimate challenges in this year. We're going to wait till the 22 estimates come out, and it's in 2023. So here the city is losing population and losing funds based on the census, now losing additional funds based on the 2021 estimate. And even though the Census Bureau doesn't have any, since they're not allowing challenge options for the city's had to sue. Obviously the Census Bureau will have to respond. The city was just asking, could we get the formula? Could we get the components and the values of the components that went into the population estimate, which are different than the census? And so based on some of the background, it looks like the Census Bureau has said that the city has gained housing units, but they're talking about also gaining 13,000 housing units, 16,000 vacancies. So they've now said that the city's vacancy rate has gone from 18% in 2020 to 22% in 2021.
Well,
none of the information makes a lot of sense. So I think the city had the challenge in this way.
Well, we'll continue to monitor what happens with this lawsuit, and hopefully the city can get more answers. And either way it goes, at least be in more agreement with whatever that population estimate is. Kurt, thank you so much for the perspective. Appreciate you joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.